Maya, when you first saw your childhood home after 15 years, what went through your mind?
Tony, I expected rubble, twisted metal, maybe some foundation stones if I was lucky. The earthquake took everything, my parents, my sister, our entire neighborhood. But when I crested that hill and looked down into the valley, I saw something that made my hand shake so badly I had to pull over. The corner bakery where my mom bought bread every Sunday was standing. Not rebuilt, Tony, standing. Same weathered brick, same faded awning, same crack in the front window that had been there since I was 12. It should have been impossible. Everything in that area was completely destroyed. I have the geological surveys to prove it. Yet there it was, exactly as I remembered from before the quake.
But how could a building destroyed 15 years ago simply reappear?
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
Maya, when you first got that call from the university asking you to return to your hometown after 15 years, what went through your mind?
Long pause. I remember standing in my office in Seattle, looking out at the sound and feeling like the ground had shifted beneath me all over again. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, someone who'd spent her career studying earthquakes, and a simple phone call could still shake me to my core.
Tell me about that day 15 years ago. What do you remember most clearly?
The silence afterward. People always expect me to say it was the shaking or the sound of buildings collapsing, but it was the silence that followed. I was 28 then, visiting my parents for my father's birthday. We were having dinner. My mother had made her famous dumplings, the ones that took her all afternoon to fold just right. My younger brother was complaining about his graduate studies, same as always.
And then?
The initial tremor felt like a truck passing by. Living in California, you learn to gauge these things quickly. But this one didn't stop. It kept building and building. I watched my mother's good china, the set she only brought out for special occasions, start dancing across the table. My father tried to get us all under the doorway, but the house was old, Maya. Built in 1952, before modern earthquake codes.
How long did the shaking last?
Officially, 2 minutes and 30 to 7 seconds. But when you're living through it, time becomes meaningless. I remember thinking, as the ceiling began to crack above us, that this was exactly the kind of seismic event I'd been studying in textbooks. The analytical part of my brain was actually cataloging the wave patterns. Can you believe that? Even as my world was literally falling apart.
You were trapped for how long?
18 hours. I was in an air pocket created by a fallen beam, the same beam that. Pause, the same beam that crushed my family. I could hear the rescue crews above me, their voices getting closer, then farther away. I kept calling out, but the debris muffled everything. Do you know what I thought about during those 18 hours, Tony?
What?
Plate tectonics, the movement of the Earth's crust, how the stress builds up along fault lines over decades, centuries, until something has to give. I actually found it comforting, thinking about those massive geological processes. It made what was happening feel inevitable, I suppose, like it was just the Earth doing what the Earth does.
But you've since changed your mind about that?
Bitter laugh. Oh, have I ever. You know, Tony, I spent the next 15 years becoming one of the country's leading experts on seismic activity. I told myself it was to honor my family's memory, to help prevent other tragedies. But really, I think I was trying to make sense of that day, to find some scientific explanation that would help me sleep at night.
What drew you away from your hometown originally? Before the earthquake, I mean.
Graduate school at Caltech. I was working on my PhD in seismology, specializing in earthquake prediction models. My parents were so proud. First person in our family to get an advanced degree. My mother used to brag to all the neighbors about her daughter, the scientist. She'd say I was going to learn how to predict earthquakes before they happened, save thousands of lives.
That must have added another layer of complexity to your grief.
You could say that. Here I was, supposedly an expert on earthquakes, and I couldn't save the 3 people who mattered most to me. For years, I pored over the seismic data from that day, looking for signs I might have missed. Warning tremors, unusual patterns. Anything that might have given us a few minutes heads up.
And what did you find?
That's just it. The data was clean. Textbook earthquake, a previously unknown fault line under the town, probably building pressure for centuries. The geological survey after the disaster confirmed it. Everything checked out perfectly. Too perfectly, I'm starting to think.
When you say too perfectly, what do you mean?
Well, that's something I've only begun to understand since returning. But let me ask you something, Tony. In 15 years of studying earthquakes all over the world, from Chile to Japan to Turkey, have you ever heard of a fault line that produces exactly the kind of seismic signature the textbooks describe? No anomalies, no irregularities, no unexpected secondary waves?
I'm not a seismologist, Maya, but that does sound unusually neat.
It's like finding a perfectly spherical boulder in nature. Theoretically possible, but so unlikely that you'd start looking for other explanations. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You asked about the phone call from the university.
Yes. What exactly did they want you to investigate?
Subsidence, they said. The town has been abandoned since the quake. Too expensive to rebuild, too dangerous according to the geological surveys. But apparently some satellite imagery over the past few months has shown unusual ground movement. Small, but consistent. They needed someone to determine if the old fault was becoming active again.
And you were the obvious choice, given your personal connection to the area.
That's what I thought at first. Dr. Richardson, he's the department head, he called it a perfect fit. Said I knew the terrain better than anyone, and my expertise was exactly what they needed. Very flattering, very logical.
But you're beginning to suspect there was more to it.
Tony, I've been thinking about that conversation a lot lately. Dr. Richardson knew about my family, of course. Everyone in the department knows my history. But the way he phrased things, he said they needed someone who would understand what they might find, not someone who could analyze it or explain it. Someone who would understand it.
That's an interesting distinction.
At the time, I just thought he was being sensitive about my personal connection to the place. But now... Pause. Have you ever had the feeling that you're being led somewhere, Tony? Like all the choices you think you're making are actually just steps on a path someone else laid out for you?
That's a rather unsettling thought. Tell me about the drive back to your hometown. That must have been emotional.
I flew into Sacramento and rented a car. The drive takes about 3 hours through the Sierra foothills. Beautiful country. Oak trees, rolling hills, granite outcroppings. For the first 2 hours, I was fine. Even enjoying myself, if I'm honest. I'd forgotten how peaceful that landscape could be.
What changed?
I started recognizing landmarks. The old gas station where my father used to stop for coffee on our weekend camping trips. The bridge over Willow Creek where my brother caught his first trout. Suddenly, every mile marker was pulling me backward in time. By the time I reached the last hill before town, my hands were shaking so badly I had to pull over.
How long did you sit there?
Maybe 20 minutes. I called my colleague in Seattle, Dr. Patterson. Told her I was having second thoughts, that maybe this assignment was too personal for me to handle objectively. You know what she said?
What?
She said objectivity was overrated, especially in science. That sometimes you need someone who cares enough about the answers to ask the right questions. She was right, of course, but I wonder now if she knew more about what I'd find than she let on.
You think your colleagues were somehow in on this?
I don't know what to think anymore, Tony. But let me tell you about what I saw when I finally drove over that hill. The town was gone. I expected that. What I didn't expect was how completely nature had tried to reclaim it. 15 years of grass and wildflowers growing through the rubble, trees sprouting from what used to be Main Street. It was beautiful, in a way. Like the earth was trying to heal itself.
But something felt wrong.
Not wrong, exactly. Different. I'd seen plenty of disaster sites in my career, Tony. There's usually a randomness to the destruction, even years later. Pieces scattered by wind and weather, gradual erosion changing the landscape. But this place, it was like someone had been maintaining it, preserving it.
What do you mean by preserving it?
The rubble piles were too neat, too stable. After 15 years of weather, earthquakes don't leave such organized destruction, and the vegetation, while abundant, seemed to be growing around the ruins rather than through them. as if something was guiding its growth.
Where did you stay that first night?
There's a small motel about 10 miles away, in the next town over. The Pineview Inn. It's the kind of place that hasn't been updated since the 1970s. Wood paneling, shag carpet, the smell of old cigarettes that no amount of cleaning can eliminate. But the owner, Mrs. Henderson, she remembered me from before the earthquake.
What was that conversation like?
Awkward at first. She kept apologizing for bringing up the past, asking if I was sure I wanted to be back here. But then she said something interesting. She mentioned that I wasn't the first person to come asking questions about the old town recently.
Oh, who else had been there?
She was vague about it. Said there'd been a few people over the past couple of years. Not scientists or government officials, just visitors. People who seemed to know exactly where they were going, who didn't need directions to find the ruins. They'd stay a night or two, always paid in cash, never left much of an impression except...
Except what?
Except they all asked the same question. Whether anyone had noticed anything unusual happening in the ruins. Any changes, any movement. Mrs. Henderson thought they were ghost hunters or curiosity seekers at first, but they seemed too serious for that, too focused.
Did she describe any of these visitors?
One detail stuck with me. She said there was an older man, maybe in his 60s, who'd been coming back every few months for the past 2 years. Always drove the same car, a dark blue sedan, very clean, very expensive looking. He never stayed at the motel, just stopped to ask his questions and buy a cup of coffee. But here's the strange part, Tony.
What?
She said he knew things about the town that even the locals had forgotten. Street names that had changed decades ago. Families who'd moved away before the earthquake. As if he'd lived there once, a long time ago, but no one remembered him.
That is strange. Did you get a name?
She never asked, and he never offered. But she did say one thing that sent a chill down my spine. The last time he'd been by, just a few weeks before my arrival, he'd asked specifically about seismologists, whether any had been by recently, or whether any were expected to visit soon.
As if he knew you were coming.
That's exactly what I thought, but I told myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe he'd heard through academic channels that someone was being sent to investigate. The scientific community isn't that large after all.
But you're having doubts about that explanation?
Tony, I've learned that when you start explaining away too many coincidences, you're probably missing something important. And what I discovered the next morning. Well, let's just say coincidence became a much harder theory to maintain.
What did you find?
I went to the ruins at dawn, partly because I wanted to see the place in good light, but mainly because I wasn't sleeping anyway. I'd spent half the night staring at the ceiling, thinking about my family, wondering if I was making a terrible mistake by coming back.
And when you got there?
The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. Not just peaceful, absolutely silent. No bird songs, no insect noise, no wind in the trees. It was as if the whole area was holding its breath. I've been in remote locations all over the world, Tony, but I've never experienced silence that complete.
That must have been unnerving.
It was. But what really got my attention was the building where my family's house used to stand. I'd been dreading seeing it, but when I got there... Long pause, Tony. I need you to understand something. I remember exactly how that rubble pile looked on the day they pulled me out 15 years ago. Every beam, every chunk of concrete, every piece of twisted metal. It's burned into my memory.
And it had changed?
Not changed. Organized. The debris that had been scattered in a rough circle was now arranged in neat, deliberate piles. And in the center, where our kitchen table used to be, someone had cleared a perfect square of ground and placed a single object.
What kind of object?
My mother's teacup. The blue one with the small crack near the handle that she refused to throw away because it had been her mother's. It was sitting there on the bare ground, clean and undamaged, as if someone had just finished drinking from it.
So, Maya, when you first pulled into town that morning, what did you see? Paint me a picture of what 15 years had done to the place you once called home.
Long pause. You know, Tony, I thought I was prepared. I'd seen the satellite images, read the reports, but driving down what used to be Main Street, the silence hit me first, before anything visual. No birds, no insects, no wind through leaves because there weren't any trees left. Just this oppressive quiet that seemed to press against my eardrums.
And the buildings themselves?
Frozen in time, but not in the way you'd expect. The old courthouse was split clean down the middle, but both halves were still standing, like someone had taken a massive cleaver to it but couldn't quite finish the job. My childhood dentist's office was pancaked, but you could still see Dr. Peterson's shingle hanging from one corner, swaying even though there was no breeze.
You mentioned in our preliminary conversation that something felt different about the ruins compared to other earthquake sites you'd studied professionally. Can you elaborate on that?
Pause. In my 15 years as a seismologist, I've walked through dozens of disaster zones. Mexico City in '85, Northridge, Kobe. There's always this sense of entropy, you know? Nature reclaiming things, vegetation growing through cracks, weathering, gradual collapse as gravity and time do their work. But here, Tony, it was like time had stopped on April 15, 2009, at exactly 3:47 in the afternoon.
That's very specific timing.
That's when the quake hit, when my world ended. I was away at graduate school, defending my thesis on seismic prediction models. The irony wasn't lost on me then, and it certainly isn't now. I was literally presenting research on earthquake forecasting when the ground opened up and swallowed my family.
Your parents and sister were all at home when it happened?
Mom was in her garden. She always said the afternoon light was perfect for her tomatoes around that time. Dad was probably in his workshop in the basement, tinkering with some old radio. And Sarah. Voice softened Sarah would have been getting ready for her shift at the diner. She was saving money for nursing school, working double shifts most days.
Maya, I can hear how difficult this still is. Take your time.
Clears throat. The thing is, Tony, when I walked through our neighborhood that first day back, I could still smell Mom's roses. After 15 years. That's not possible. Rose bushes don't survive that kind of trauma, and certainly not without water or care for a decade and a half.
But you smelled them.
Clear as day. And when I found our house, or what was left of it, the front porch swing was still moving, just slightly, back and forth, like someone had just gotten up from it.
Did you investigate that immediately, or did you need time to process what you were seeing?
I stood there for probably 20 minutes, just watching it move. My scientific mind was cataloging possibilities: thermal expansion, residual structural stress, underground water flow causing foundation shifts. But my heart knew I was looking at something impossible.
You've mentioned that you weren't entirely alone in the town. There were others?
A few. Old Pete Morrison, who used to run the hardware store. He'd been camping in what remained of the store since about 6 months after the evacuation order was lifted. Said he had nowhere else to go. And there was Mrs. Chen, no relation despite the name, who'd come back to tend her husband's grave in the cemetery.
What did they tell you about life in the ruins?
Pete said the strangest things. He claimed that some mornings, he'd wake up and find small repairs around his makeshift shelter. A loose board tightened, a torn tarp mended. He assumed Mrs. Chen was helping him, but when I asked her about it, she said the same thing was happening at her late husband's gravesite. Weeds pulled, flowers that she hadn't planted growing in neat rows.
How did they explain these occurrences?
They didn't, really. Pete just shrugged and said the town was taking care of its own. Mrs. Chen was more philosophical about it. She said some places hold on to love so tightly that they can't quite let go, even after tragedy.
What was your professional assessment of their claims?
Initially, grief does strange things to perception, Tony. People see what they need to see to cope with loss. I've encountered it before in disaster zones. Survivors sometimes report hearing voices of loved ones, seeing figures in the rubble. The mind creates meaning where there might be none.
But something changed your perspective.
The second night I was there, I was staying in a motel about 20 miles outside town, the closest place that was still operational. I couldn't sleep, so I drove back around midnight, just to sit in the silence and think. When I got to Main Street, I saw lights.
What kind of lights?
Soft, warm light coming from windows that I knew for certain had been empty and dark just hours before. Not electric light, more like candlelight or oil lamps. and I could hear something that made my blood run cold.
What did you hear, Maya?
Piano music. Someone was playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, my mother's favorite piece. She used to play it every evening after dinner, and Sarah and I would do our homework to that melody. But Tony, the music was coming from the wreckage of Steinman's music shop, and I knew that building had been gutted. I'd walked through it myself earlier that day.
Did you investigate the source of the music?
I tried to. But as soon as I got out of my car, everything stopped. The lights went out, the music cut off, and I was left standing in the middle of a dead town in the middle of the night, questioning my own sanity.
That must have been terrifying.
Terrifying, yes, but also, familiar. Like coming home to a house where someone has moved all the furniture just slightly to the left. Everything recognizable but wrong at the same time.
Did you consider leaving then? Going back to your life in California?
Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to get in my car and drive straight back to the university. But I kept thinking about Sarah's last voicemail to me, the one I got after the quake hit, but before the phone lines went dead completely.
You've never shared the contents of that message publicly.
She said she loved me, of course. But the last thing she said was, "Maya, if anything happens, promise me you'll come back. This place, our family, will always be here waiting for you." At the time, I thought it was just frightened rambling. People say strange things when they're scared. But standing there in the ruins, hearing Mom's music, long pause, I began to wonder if Sarah somehow knew more than any of us realized.
So you decided to stay and investigate.
I decided to stay and listen. Sometimes, Tony, the most important scientific discoveries start not with hypothesis or methodology, but with simply paying attention to what the world is trying to tell you.
Maya, I have to ask you about something that's been weighing on my mind since our last conversation. When you first walked back into those ruins after 15 years, what did you actually see? I mean, beyond the obvious devastation.
Long pause. You know, Tony, that's the question I've been avoiding, even in my own mind. When I first stepped through what used to be the town square, there was this strange quality to the light. The late afternoon sun was hitting the broken stones at angles that shouldn't have existed anymore. The old fountain in the center, the one that was completely destroyed in the quake, had these fragments arranged around its base in perfect concentric circles.
Perfect circles? That seems unusual for earthquake debris, doesn't it?
Exactly. In all my years studying seismic events, debris patterns follow the laws of physics: chaotic distribution, impact shadows, directional scatter based on wave propagation. But these stones, they looked almost like someone had been playing with them, arranging them. The strange part was how the moss had grown over them, as if they'd been in those positions for years.
Tell me about the house, your family's house. What was left of it when you arrived?
Pause. The foundation was still there, of course. Concrete doesn't just disappear. But the way the bricks from the walls had fallen, Tony, it was like looking at a three-dimensional puzzle that someone had started putting back together. The front steps were completely intact, which made no sense given that the entire porch had collapsed 15 years ago. I remember standing there, thinking about how my mother used to sit on those steps every evening, shelling peas from her garden.
You mentioned your mother's garden in our previous conversation. Was there any trace of it left?
That's where things got really strange. The apple tree she planted when I was 7, the one that was completely uprooted in the earthquake, there was this young sapling growing in the exact same spot. Same variety, Tony, same positioning relative to where the kitchen window used to be. I know because I used to watch her pick apples from that tree every fall, standing right at that window.
How could you be certain it was the same variety after all these years?
The leaves. Honeycrisp apples have very distinctive foliage, and my mother was particular about her fruit trees. She always said that tree was her connection to her own mother, who had given her the original seedling. But here's what really got to me. The bark had these same 3 small scars near the base where my brother carved his initials when he was 10.
The same scars on a 15-year-old sapling?
I know how it sounds. I'm a scientist, Tony. I understand plant biology, growth patterns, cellular development. But I traced those marks with my finger, and they were identical. Even down to the way the bark had healed around the edges of the letters.
What did you think in that moment? standing there, touching those scars?
I thought about my brother, how he used to climb that tree every summer, how he'd sit up in the branches and read those adventure novels he loved so much. The day of the earthquake, he was supposed to be at school, but he'd stayed home with a fever. He was in his bedroom when the house came down. Pause. Sometimes I wonder if the tree remembers him somehow.
That's a beautiful thought, Maya. Tell me about the other families who lived in your neighborhood. Did you know them well?
Oh, we all knew each other. Mrs. Patterson lived next door with her collection of ceramic owls. She must have had 200 of them lining every shelf and windowsill. Mr. and Mrs. Kowalski across the street grew the most incredible tomatoes. Their grandson used to help them with the harvest every August. There was the young couple at the end of the block, the ones with the twin girls who were always practicing piano.
When you walked through the neighborhood ruins, did you think about all those lives?
Every step. I could almost hear the piano music drifting from where their house used to stand. And Tony, this might sound impossible, but I swear I could smell Mrs. Kowalski's tomato plants. That rich green smell they get in late summer when the fruit is almost ready. There was nothing growing there, just broken concrete and twisted metal, but the scent was unmistakable.
You mentioned that you'd been receiving reports about unusual seismic activity in the area. When did those reports first start coming in?
About 6 months ago. Small tremors, nothing dramatic, but they were happening in patterns that didn't match any known geological processes. The frequency was too regular, almost rhythmic. When I analyzed the data, it reminded me of a heartbeat. Or breathing.
Breathing? That's an interesting way to describe seismic activity.
I know it sounds anthropomorphic, but the intervals between tremors had this organic quality. They'd increase in frequency for several hours, then slow down, like something large was settling into sleep. My colleagues thought I was reading too much into the data, but I've been studying earthquakes for 25 years. I know what normal geological stress patterns look like.
Is that what finally convinced you to come back? These unusual patterns?
Partly. But if I'm being honest, Tony, I think I always knew I'd have to return eventually. There were too many questions left unanswered about the original earthquake. The preliminary reports never sat right with me. The epicenter calculations, the magnitude readings, even the duration of the shaking. Everything about that event seemed wrong from a geological standpoint.
Wrong how?
Too precise. Natural earthquakes have irregular characteristics, variable frequencies, unpredictable rupture patterns. But the quake that destroyed my hometown had this mathematical precision to it, like it had been designed rather than naturally occurring. I've never said that publicly because it sounds impossible, but the data doesn't lie.
And now, after seeing the ruins with your own eyes, what do you think really happened 15 years ago?
Long pause. I think someone wanted me to come back, Tony. I think they've been waiting for me all along.
Maya, you mentioned that your second day back in town started normally enough. You were documenting the reconstruction patterns, taking measurements. What changed?
I was working near what used to be the old Presbyterian church on Maple Street. The building had been completely flattened in the quake, reduced to nothing but scattered stones and twisted metal. But when I arrived that morning, I could see the foundation stones had arranged themselves into perfect corners again.
And you were still thinking this might be some kind of geological settling process?
I was clinging to that theory, yes. Even though every instinct I'd developed over 20 years as a seismologist was screaming that it was impossible. I had my tablet out, measuring the distances between stones, trying to calculate how much movement had occurred overnight.
What time was this?
Early, maybe 7 in the morning. The sun was just starting to burn off the fog that always rolls in from the coast. I remember thinking how quiet everything was. No birds, no insects. Just this heavy silence that made every sound I made seem too loud.
And then, something happened to break that silence?
I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from somewhere behind me. I turned around, and there was a man standing about 50 feet away, just watching me.
A stranger?
That's what I thought at first. He was older, maybe 70s, wearing clothes that looked like they hadn't been updated since the 1990s. Gray hair, deeply lined face, but his eyes. Pause, Tony. His eyes were the most alert, calculating eyes I'd ever seen.
What did he say to you?
He said, "Dr. Chen, I've been waiting for you to come back." Just like that. Like he'd been expecting me for years.
How did you respond to that, Maya?
I was startled, obviously. Here I was in what I thought was an abandoned town, and this man not only knew who I was, but had apparently been waiting for my return. I asked him who he was, how he knew my name.
And his answer?
He said his name was Edmund Reeves, and that he'd known my parents. Said he'd been watching over the town since the earthquake, making sure everything stayed exactly as it should be.
Those were his exact words? Making sure everything stayed exactly as it should be?
Yes, and the way he said it sent a chill through me. There was something proprietary about it, like he owned the place, like he was the caretaker of some kind of preserve.
What did you make of that phrase at the time?
I thought he might be one of those people who never left after a disaster. You know, someone who becomes so attached to a place that they can't move on, even when there's nothing left. But then he started walking toward me, and I noticed something odd about the way he moved.
Odd how?
He stepped around certain areas of rubble with such precision, like he knew exactly where every piece of debris was located. Not the way someone would if they were just being careful, but like he was following a map that only he could see.
Did he explain how he knew your parents?
He said he'd worked with my father on some research project years before the earthquake. Something about geological surveys and mineral rights. But Maya, my father never mentioned anyone named Edmund Reeves, and I would have remembered that name.
Why would you have remembered it specifically?
Because after my parents died, I went through all of my father's papers, his research notes, his correspondence. I was looking for any clue about why they might have stayed in town that day instead of evacuating with everyone else. There was no Edmund Reeves anywhere in his files.
So, this man was either lying or
there was something about my father's work that I never knew about. Something that had been deliberately hidden from me.
How did that possibility make you feel?
Angry. Confused. I'd spent 15 years believing I understood what happened to my family, and suddenly this stranger was suggesting there were secrets I'd never uncovered. But there was something else, Tony. Something that frightened me more than his claims about knowing my parents.
What was that?
As we were talking, I kept glancing back at the church foundation where I'd been working. The stones I'd been measuring. The ones that had moved into position overnight. While we stood there, maybe 10 minutes of conversation, I swear I could see them shifting. Tiny movements, almost imperceptible, but the gaps between the stones were getting smaller.
You could actually see the reconstruction happening in real time?
It was so subtle I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. But then Edmund noticed where I was looking, and he smiled. Not a friendly smile, Maya. A satisfied smile, like he was pleased that I was finally seeing what he wanted me to see.
Did he acknowledge what was happening?
He said, "The town remembers what it used to be. It wants to go back." Then he asked me if I'd brought my seismic equipment, if I was planning to take readings.
That seems like an odd question for a casual observer to ask.
Exactly what I thought. I told him I had basic equipment in my car, and he said I should set it up. Said I'd find the readings very interesting over the next few days.
Almost like he was predicting increased seismic activity.
Or like he knew it was coming. That's when I realized I wasn't dealing with some harmless old man who'd been left behind after the disaster. This was someone who understood what was happening to the town, someone who might even be connected to why it was happening.
What did you do with that realization?
I made a decision that probably wasn't very smart. Instead of leaving, instead of getting back in my car and driving straight to the university to report what I'd seen, I decided I had to know more. I told Edmund I'd set up my equipment and take those readings he'd suggested.
And how did he react to that?
He said he'd check on me in a few days to see what I'd discovered. Then he walked away, back toward the center of town, stepping around debris with that same unnatural precision. I watched him until he disappeared behind what used to be the post office.
Did you set up the seismic equipment that day?
I did. And Tony, what those instruments recorded over the next 72 hours changed everything I thought I knew about earthquakes, about geology, and about what really happened to my hometown 15 years ago.
Maya, you mentioned that you'd been documenting the reconstruction process for several days before the real breakthrough happened. Can you walk me through what changed that morning?
I was setting up my equipment near what used to be the old courthouse. Same routine I'd been following since I arrived. But when I looked through my camera lens to take the daily progression shots, something was different.
Different how?
The stones weren't just moving anymore, Tony. They were accelerating. What had been happening over weeks was now happening in minutes. I watched an entire section of wall rebuild itself while I stood there.
That must have been terrifying to witness.
Terrifying doesn't begin to cover it. 15 years of scientific training, and I'm watching granite blocks float through the air like they're weightless. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the camera steady.
Did you manage to capture it on film?
I tried, but that's when things got even stranger. Every piece of electronic equipment I had started malfunctioning. The camera died first, then my seismic monitors, even my digital watch stopped working.
All at once?
Within seconds of each other. I remember thinking about electromagnetic interference, solar flares, anything that might explain it scientifically. But deep down, I knew this was something else entirely.
What did you do when the equipment failed?
I did what any desperate scientist would do. I started taking notes by hand, sketching what I was seeing. But Maya, the strangest part wasn't the reconstruction itself.
What do you mean?
The buildings weren't just rebuilding randomly. They were rebuilding exactly as they had been before the earthquake. Every crack in the sidewalk, every chip in the paint, even the graffiti on the alley walls. Perfect restoration down to the smallest detail.
How could you be certain about those details after 15 years?
Because I grew up there. I knew every corner of that town. The way Mrs. Patterson's fence always leaned slightly to the left, the spot where the library steps had settled unevenly. Things only a local would remember.
That's when you realized this wasn't a natural phenomenon.
Exactly. Natural forces don't have memory, Tony. Rock doesn't remember what shape it used to hold. But something was guiding this process. Something with perfect knowledge of how everything had been.
How long did this accelerated reconstruction continue?
About 20 minutes. Then everything just stopped. Complete silence. Even the wind died down. It was like the whole area was holding its breath.
And that's when you saw him?
Long pause. Yes. That's when I saw him.
Can you describe that moment for us?
I was standing in the middle of what had been Main Street, surrounded by these impossible, half-rebuilt structures. My scientific mind was completely shattered. Everything I thought I understood about physics, about reality, was crumbling.
You felt vulnerable.
Completely exposed. And that's when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate. Someone walking across the rubble like they owned the place.
Did you recognize him immediately?
Not his face, no. It had been 15 years, and he'd aged. But something about the way he moved, the way he carried himself, it triggered this deep, instinctive fear I hadn't felt since I was a child.
Fear from before the earthquake?
Yes, memories I'd buried started surfacing. This man had been around town in the months leading up to the disaster. Always watching, always taking notes. My father had mentioned him once, said something about government surveyors, but there was something off about that explanation.
What did he say to you?
He said my name. Not Dr. Chen, not ma'am. He said, "Maya, you came back, just like we knew you would. Like he'd been expecting me for 15 years.
That must have been chilling to hear.
It was confirmation of my worst fear. This wasn't coincidence. The earthquake, my family's death, my return to town, even the reconstruction. It was all connected, all planned.
Did he explain why he'd been waiting?
He said there were things I needed to understand about what really happened to my family. About why the earthquake occurred exactly when and where it did. And about why I was the only member of the Chen family who happened to be away from town that day.
You'd never questioned that timing before?
I was 25, Tony. I was focused on graduate school, on building my career. I thought I was lucky to have survived. But standing there, looking at this man who clearly knew more about my life than I did, I realized luck had nothing to do with it.
What did you do?
I asked him the question that had been burning in my mind since I'd arrived. I asked him what he was.
Maya, you mentioned discovering that the stone formations weren't random. What did you mean by that?
Long pause. Tony, when I first saw those perfectly aligned foundation stones, I thought it might be some kind of geological coincidence. But the more I studied the patterns, the more I realized there was an intelligence behind it. The stones weren't just settling into place. They were being positioned with surgical precision.
That must have been a frightening realization. How did you process something that contradicted everything you'd learned as a seismologist?
You know, I've spent my entire career studying how the Earth moves, how it breaks things apart. I thought I understood destruction. But this was creation, and it terrified me more than any earthquake ever could. I remember sitting in my rental car that third night, watching the ruins through binoculars, and I saw a section of my childhood home's wall grow 3 inches taller while I watched.
3 inches. In real time.
In real time. Stone by stone, mortar appearing from nowhere, each piece finding its exact place. I had to pull over because my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hold the binoculars steady.
How do you reconcile that kind of experience with a lifetime of scientific training?
Pause. That's the thing, Tony. I couldn't. For days I questioned my own sanity. I called my mentor, Dr. Harrison, from graduate school. Poor man listened to me ramble for an hour about impossible geology and self-healing ruins. He suggested I might be experiencing delayed grief trauma.
But you didn't believe that.
Part of me wanted to. It would have been so much easier to check myself into a facility somewhere, get some medication, and chalk it up to stress. But I had photographs, measurements, soil samples. The evidence was mounting, and evidence doesn't lie. People do, but rocks don't.
You mentioned earlier that you started having doubts about the original earthquake. When did those feelings first surface?
Long pause. About a week into my investigation. I was reviewing the original seismic data from 15 years ago, cross-referencing it with what I was seeing now. The pattern of destruction had been too uniform, too complete. Natural earthquakes are chaotic. They leave random pockets of survival, irregular damage patterns. But our town had been leveled with almost mathematical precision.
As if someone had calculated exactly how much force was needed.
Exactly. And then I started thinking about the timing. The earthquake hit it at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. Most people were asleep, unable to react or escape. If you wanted to ensure maximum casualties with minimum warning, that would be the optimal time.
Maya, that's a heavy accusation to carry alone. Did you share these suspicions with anyone?
Who would I tell? That I thought my family and 300 other people were murdered by someone who could control earthquakes? That the ruins of my hometown were rebuilding themselves? I'd have been committed or laughed out of the scientific community.
But the isolation must have been overwhelming.
Pause. It was. I'd lost my family 15 years ago, and now I was losing my grip on reality, or at least what I'd always believed reality to be. I spent hours each day documenting everything, creating detailed reports that no one would ever read or believe.
What kept you going during those dark moments?
Anger, mostly. If someone had caused that earthquake, if someone had murdered my parents and little sister, then they needed to be held accountable. But there was something else too, a feeling that I was being watched, that my return wasn't coincidental.
Watched by whom?
I didn't know then. But twice I found fresh tire tracks near my observation posts. Tracks that hadn't been there the day before. And one morning I discovered that someone had been in my hotel room while I was out. Nothing was missing, but my research papers had been moved, photographed maybe.
So you weren't alone in this investigation?
No, I wasn't. Someone else knew about the ruins, about what was happening. Someone who'd been waiting for me to come back. I just didn't realize yet whether they were friend or enemy.
How did that realization change your approach?
I became more careful, more paranoid. I started varying my routes, using different observation points each day. I bought a second camera and hid duplicate copies of all my research. If someone wanted to stop me from learning the truth, I was going to make sure the evidence survived, even if I didn't.
Even if you didn't, Maya, did you truly believe you were in physical danger?
Pause, Tony. When you discover that everything you thought you knew about the world is wrong, when you realize that someone has the power to control the very ground beneath your feet, physical danger becomes the least of your concerns. I was afraid of something much worse than death. I was afraid of the truth.
Maya, when you first started noticing the stones moving back into place, how did that change you as a scientist? I imagine everything you'd built your career on suddenly felt uncertain.
Long pause. You know, Tony, I've spent my entire adult life measuring tremors, analyzing fault lines, predicting when the Earth might shake again. Science was my anchor after losing my family. It gave me rules, explanations, comfort in knowing that even destruction follows patterns we can understand.
And then you found something that broke those rules entirely.
Completely shattered them. I remember standing there at 3 a.m, watching a cornerstone slide into place with no human hands guiding it. My instruments showed no seismic activity, no electromagnetic anomalies. Just stone moving against every law of physics I knew.
How does someone trained in empirical evidence process something like that?
Soft laugh badly at first. I questioned my eyesight, my equipment, my sanity. I ran the same tests dozens of times. But eventually you reach a point where denial becomes more exhausting than acceptance.
Tell me about that moment when you stopped fighting what you were seeing.
It happened on my 4th night back. I was documenting another impossible reconstruction when I realized I was crying. Not from fear or confusion, but from something deeper. Relief, maybe. For 15 years I'd carried this weight that the earthquake was somehow random, meaningless. That my parents and sister died for no reason at all.
You mentioned your sister before. This investigation isn't just professional for you, is it?
Pause. Sarah was 8 years younger than me. She'd just started her first year of college when the quake hit. She wanted to study architecture, kept talking about designing buildings that could withstand anything nature threw at them. Voice softening, she used to say she wanted to make sure no family would lose their home the way others had.
She sounds like she inherited your desire to protect people.
Sarah was braver than I ever was. After our parents died in that car accident when she was 12, I became obsessed with control, with predicting disasters before they happened. But Sarah wanted to build solutions, create beauty that could endure. She saw hope where I saw only potential destruction.
And now you're watching her vision come to life in the strangest possible way.
That's what makes this so personal, Tony. These buildings aren't just rebuilding themselves randomly. They're becoming stronger, more elegant. There's an intentionality to it that reminds me of how Sarah used to sketch her designs, always improving, always making something better than it was before.
Do you think she would have understood what you're seeing now, even when it defies scientific explanation?
Long pause. Sarah always believed there were forces in the universe we hadn't discovered yet. She'd say, "Maya, just because we can't measure something doesn't mean it's not real." I used to argue with her about that, insisted that measurable phenomena were the only reliable truth.
How has investigating these ruins changed your relationship with uncertainty?
I'm learning to sit with questions that don't have immediate answers. Before, uncertainty felt like failure. Now it feels like the beginning of understanding something larger than myself.
You mentioned someone might be waiting for your return. That suggests this isn't entirely about natural forces, even mysterious ones.
Voice becoming more guarded. There are signs that someone has been monitoring the site. Equipment that isn't mine. Observations recorded in handwriting I don't recognize. But whoever it is understands both the science and the impossibility of what's happening here.
Does that frighten you?
It should. Any rational person would be terrified. But I feel like I'm finally walking toward answers I've needed for 15 years, even if I didn't know I needed them.
What would you say to people who think you should walk away from something this dangerous?
Pause. I'd say I tried walking away for 15 years, and it never gave me peace. Sometimes the most dangerous thing is leaving questions unasked, wounds unhealed. My family deserves better than my fear.
How are you taking care of yourself through this process? This can't be easy emotionally.
I talk to Sarah sometimes out loud when I'm working late at the site. I tell her what I'm discovering, ask her what she thinks about the architectural changes. It probably sounds strange, but it helps me feel less alone with all of this.
That doesn't sound strange at all. It sounds like love finding a way to continue.
Voice breaking slightly. She would have been fascinated by this mystery, Tony. She would have seen the beauty in it immediately, while I'm still struggling to accept that it's real.
Maybe seeing it through her eyes is exactly what this investigation needs. Maya, when you first witnessed the stones moving back into place, what went through your mind? Not as a scientist, but as someone who lost everything in that earthquake?
Long pause. I think I stopped breathing for a moment, Tony. Here I was, watching the very walls that had crushed my family slowly reassembling themselves. It felt like the universe was mocking me, you know? Like some cosmic joke where the town gets a second chance but the people don't.
That must have stirred up feelings you thought you'd buried.
Oh, they weren't buried. I'd been carrying them for 15 years, telling myself I'd made peace with what happened. But standing there, watching those impossible repairs, I realized I'd never really grieved properly. I'd just run. First to graduate school, then to my research. Always moving forward because stopping meant facing what I'd lost.
You mentioned earlier that you'd been avoiding this place. What finally brought you back after all those years?
My colleague received some unusual seismic readings from the area. Nothing dramatic, just these tiny rhythmic tremors that didn't match any known geological patterns. As the only seismologist who knew the region's history intimately, I was the obvious choice to investigate, though I suspect the university thought it would be therapeutic for me somehow.
Were they right about that?
Bitter laugh, not in the way they imagined. But yes, in a sense. Seeing the impossible forced me to question everything I thought I knew, not just about geology, but about my own assumptions, about what really happened that night 15 years ago.
What do you mean by that, Maya?
I'd always accepted the official explanation. Seismic activity along a previously unknown fault line. A tragic but natural disaster. But as I studied those self-repairing structures, I started noticing things that didn't add up. The original earthquake's signature was too clean, too focused. Real seismic events are messy, chaotic. This one had been almost surgically precise.
That's a disturbing realization for someone in your field.
It shattered my worldview, Tony. I'd built my entire career on understanding the Earth's natural processes. To discover that the event that shaped my life might have been artificially created. It made me question every paper I'd published, every theory I'd endorsed. How could I trust my own expertise when I'd missed something so fundamental?
Did you have any suspicions at the time, when you were younger?
Pause. You know, that's what haunts me most. There were signs. My father, he was just a local contractor, but he'd mentioned some unusual activity in the months before the earthquake. Strangers asking questions about the town's foundation. Geological surveys that didn't seem connected to any development projects. I was so focused on my studies, so eager to leave for college, that I barely listened.
You were 18, Maya. You couldn't have known what those details meant.
Perhaps, but I keep thinking about our last conversation. He was excited about some job opportunity, said it might change everything for our family. What if he got involved with whoever was behind this? What if my family's death wasn't just random tragedy but somehow connected to whatever these people were planning?
That's a heavy burden to carry.
The worst part is the not knowing. Standing in those ruins, watching them rebuild themselves, I felt like I was seeing my father's work. He'd always been proud of the craftsmanship in our old neighborhood, the way those buildings had been constructed to last. And now here they were, returning to exactly what he'd helped create decades ago.
How did the self-repair process actually work? What did you observe?
It was methodical, Tony. Almost respectful. The debris would sort itself first, pieces rolling across the ground to find their original positions. Then came the lifting, stones floating upward with impossible precision. But it wasn't random reconstruction. The buildings were returning to their exact original state, down to the smallest architectural details. Someone or something had perfect memory of how everything had been.
That suggests planning that goes back decades.
Exactly. And that's when I started to understand the scope of what I was dealing with. This wasn't some recent experiment gone wrong. This was something that had been in motion long before the earthquake, maybe even before I was born. The question became, why? What was so important about our little town that someone would orchestrate its destruction and then engineer its rebuilding?
Did you feel watched while you were documenting all this?
Nervous laugh constantly. There's something deeply unsettling about being alone in a place that's actively changing around you. I'd set up my equipment to monitor one area, and when I'd return the next morning, not only would my instruments be carefully moved aside, but the structures would have progressed significantly overnight. Someone was aware of my presence and working around me.
That must have been terrifying.
It should have been. But oddly, I felt more curious than afraid. After 15 years of running from my past, I was finally getting answers, even if they were impossible ones. Besides, if whoever was behind this had wanted to harm me, they'd had plenty of opportunities. Instead, they seemed to be accommodating my research.
Almost like they wanted you to discover the truth.
That thought occurred to me too, Tony. What if my return wasn't as coincidental as I'd believed? What if those seismic readings were deliberately created to draw me back? Someone with the technology to rebuild a town could certainly generate the kind of data that would intrigue a seismologist.
You're suggesting you were lured back to your hometown.
I'm suggesting that nothing about this has been accidental. The timing, the specific nature of the anomalies, even my assignment to investigate them. Someone has been orchestrating events, possibly for years, to bring me back to this place at this particular moment.
But why you specifically, Maya? What makes you important to their plans?
Long pause. I've been wrestling with that question every day since. Maybe it's because I'm one of the few people who knew the town intimately before its destruction and has the scientific background to understand what's happening now. Or maybe there's something about my family's connection to the original events that I still don't fully grasp.
Have you considered that your father might have left you some kind of message or clue?
Actually, yes. I've been thinking about his old workshop. If the buildings are restoring themselves to their original states, then everything that was there before might be returning too, including things that were buried in the earthquake, personal belongings, documents, maybe even answers about what he was really involved in during those final months.
That's both hopeful and frightening.
That describes my entire experience here, Tony. Every discovery brings me closer to understanding what happened to my family, but also deeper into something much larger and more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. I'm beginning to realize that leaving this place 15 years ago might not have been escape. It might have been preparation.
Maya, when you first witnessed the stones moving on their own, rebuilding themselves, what went through your mind as a scientist?
Long pause. You know, Tony, I've spent my entire career measuring fault lines, calculating stress patterns, predicting where the earth might crack next. Everything I knew said what I was seeing was impossible, but there I was, watching limestone blocks floating back into place like they were following some invisible blueprint.
That must have created quite a conflict between your scientific training and what your eyes were telling you.
It did more than that. It made me question everything I thought I understood about that day 15 years ago. The day I lost my parents, my sister, my entire world. I'd built my career on the assumption that it was a natural disaster, a tragic but predictable consequence of tectonic forces.
But seeing the ruins rebuild themselves changed that assumption.
Completely. I started remembering details from that morning that I'd pushed away for years. The sound wasn't right, Tony. Earthquakes have a signature rumble, a deep grinding that builds and fades. This was different, sharper, more controlled.
Controlled how?
Like someone conducting an orchestra. The initial tremor lasted exactly 47 seconds. I know because I'd been timing seismic events since I was 12. Natural quakes don't have that kind of precision. They're chaotic, unpredictable. This felt orchestrated.
You're suggesting someone engineered the earthquake that destroyed your town?
Pause. I'm saying the evidence points in that direction. The rebuilding stones, they're not just random reconstruction. They're following the exact architectural patterns from before the quake, down to the mortar lines in my childhood home's foundation.
That raises an uncomfortable question about why someone would want to recreate your town so precisely.
It's more than uncomfortable, Tony. It's terrifying. Because whoever did this has been watching, waiting. They knew I'd eventually come back. They knew I'd investigate.
What makes you so certain they knew you'd return?
The timing. The stones only started moving 3 days before I arrived. I checked with the locals. For 15 years, nothing. The ruins just sat there, weathered and broken. Then suddenly, just as I'm driving back into town, the reconstruction begins.
That seems like more than coincidence.
Much more. And there's something else. My father's workshop was the first building to start rebuilding itself. Not the town hall, not the church, not any of the larger structures. My father's small geology lab where he taught me to identify mineral samples.
Your father was a geologist too?
Amateur, but passionate. He's the one who got me interested in earth sciences. Used to say the planet was always trying to tell us stories if we knew how to listen. I thought it was just his way of making rocks seem magical to a 10-year-old.
But now you're wondering if he knew something more?
I found his research notes in the rebuilt workshop, Tony. Perfectly preserved, exactly where he left them on his desk that morning. Notes about unusual seismic readings he'd been tracking for months before the quake.
What kind of readings?
Artificial vibration patterns. Deep underground, but not from any known mining or construction operations. He'd mapped them, documented frequencies that don't occur naturally. He was building a case that someone was conducting geological experiments beneath our town.
Did he share these concerns with anyone?
That's what haunts me. His final entry was dated the night before the earthquake. He wrote that he planned to contact the State Geological Survey the next morning. He never got the chance.
You're carrying a heavy burden, Maya. Not just the loss of your family, but the possibility that their deaths weren't accidental.
For 15 years, I've honored their memory by becoming the scientist my father encouraged me to be. I've saved lives by predicting natural disasters. But if their deaths were murder disguised as a natural catastrophe, then everything I've built my life on feels like a lie.
Or perhaps it makes your work even more meaningful. You've been preventing tragedies regardless of their origin.
Pause. I hadn't thought of it that way. But Tony, there's something else. Something that changes everything about why I'm really here.
What is it?
The person who's been orchestrating this, who's been waiting for me to return. I think I know who they are, and I think they're someone I trusted completely.
Maya, when you first told me about the reconstruction phenomenon, you mentioned that your equipment detected patterns in the seismic activity. What exactly were you seeing in those readings?
The frequencies were unlike anything in my 30 years of seismology, Tony. They weren't random vibrations from settling Earth or aftershocks. They were deliberate, almost musical in their precision.
Musical. That's an interesting choice of words.
I kept thinking about resonance frequencies, how certain vibrations can shatter glass or bring down bridges, but these frequencies seem designed to do the opposite, to build rather than destroy.
And that's when you started to suspect the original earthquake wasn't natural?
Long pause, the records from 15 years ago showed similar anomalies in the days leading up to the disaster. Frequencies that shouldn't exist in nature, buried deep in the data that no one bothered to analyze thoroughly at the time.
Because everyone was focused on the aftermath, on rescue and recovery.
Exactly. But when I cross-referenced those old readings with what I was detecting now, Tony, the pattern became unmistakable. Someone had been testing something 15 years ago.
Testing what exactly?
Controlled geological manipulation. The ability to trigger seismic events with surgical precision, and apparently the ability to reverse them.
Maya, what you're describing sounds like science fiction.
I thought so too, until I found the laboratory.
Laboratory?
Hidden beneath the ruins of the old municipal building. The reconstruction had revealed a staircase that hadn't been there before, leading to a facility that had somehow survived the earthquake intact.
How is that possible?
because it was designed to survive what was coming. The walls were lined with some kind of metamaterial I'd never seen before. The equipment inside was decades ahead of anything in mainstream seismology.
And someone was still operating this facility?
Dr. Elizabeth Vance. She'd been my mentor at the university before the earthquake. I thought she'd died in the disaster, along with everyone else I cared about.
But she hadn't.
No, Tony. She'd been orchestrating it. The earthquake, the reconstruction, even my return to town. She'd been waiting for me.
Waiting for you specifically?
My doctoral research had been focused on harmonic resonance in geological structures. Vance had been guiding my work toward something I didn't understand at the time. She needed someone with my specific expertise to complete her project.
What project could possibly justify destroying an entire town?
Pause. She called it temporal geological restoration. The ability to record the exact quantum state of matter at the molecular level, then use controlled seismic forces to restore it to that previous state.
You're saying she could turn back time?
Not time itself, but physical structures. Buildings, roads, even organic matter could theoretically be restored to a previous configuration using the right frequencies and energy patterns.
But why destroy the town first?
Because she needed a large-scale test to prove the technology worked. The earthquake was her control group. She recorded everything at the moment of destruction, then spent 15 years developing the reconstruction protocols.
Maya, the implications of what you're describing
Are staggering, yes. Imagine being able to undo any disaster, any destruction. Hurricanes, wars, even aging could potentially be reversed with this technology.
But the cost, all those lives lost in your town.
She saw them as necessary sacrifices for the greater good. In her mind, once the technology was perfected, no one would ever have to die from natural disasters again.
How did you react when she explained this to you?
I was horrified, Tony, but also fascinated despite myself. The scientific breakthrough was undeniable, even if the methodology was monstrous.
Did she expect you to join her?
She'd built the entire project around my eventual participation. My family's death, my career path, even my decision to return to town had all been calculated variables in her equation.
That level of manipulation must have been devastating to realize.
What devastated me more was understanding that part of me wanted to say yes. The scientist in me recognized the incredible potential, even as the human being in me recoiled from the cost.
What did you tell her?
I asked for time to process what she'd shown me. She agreed, confident that I would ultimately see the logic of her position.
But you had other plans.
I knew I couldn't let her continue, Tony. But I also knew that simply destroying her work would waste the deaths of everyone who had already been lost. I needed to find a third option.
And did you?
Pause. That's when I discovered I wasn't the only one she'd been manipulating all these years.
Maya, you mentioned earlier that the reconstruction seemed to follow some kind of pattern. When did you first realize what that pattern actually was?
Long pause. It took me 3 weeks of measurements to accept what I was seeing. The stones weren't just rebuilding randomly, Tony. They were rebuilding in reverse chronological order.
What do you mean by that exactly?
The earthquake damage from 15 years ago was healing first. But underneath, I started finding evidence of older destruction being repaired too. Much older.
How much older are we talking about?
I found foundation stones from the 1906 earthquake being reset, then pieces from an 1868 quake I'd only read about in geological surveys. Tony, this thing has been happening for over a century.
That's when you contacted the Geological Survey Office?
Yes, and that's when I learned the truth about my predecessor. Dr. Elena Vasquez wasn't just the seismologist before me. She was my grandmother.
Your grandmother? But Maya, you said you grew up thinking you had no family left after your parents died.
That's what I believed. The adoption records were sealed, my name was changed. But Elena had been studying this phenomenon since the 1970s. She knew it was connected to something beneath the fault line, something that responds to seismic activity by trying to restore what was lost.
And she never told you?
She died when I was 12, Tony. But she left detailed notes hidden in the survey office. Notes that were meant for me to find eventually. She knew I'd become a seismologist. She knew I'd come back here.
How could she possibly know that?
Because the same thing happened to her grandfather in 1906, and his father before him in 1868. This isn't just about geology, Tony. It's about bloodlines. About some families being drawn back to witness and document what's happening here.
You're saying this phenomenon specifically calls to your family?
Not calls, exactly. But we seem to be the only ones who can see it for what it really is. Everyone else just sees normal reconstruction efforts, urban renewal projects. We see the truth.
Which is?
That something beneath our town is trying to undo every catastrophe that's ever happened here. And it's been waiting generations for someone with the right knowledge to help it succeed.
Maya, you've described this incredible phenomenon, but I sense there's something more urgent happening now. What changed?
The rebuilding accelerated, Tony. What took months before was happening in hours. And then I found the control room.
Control room?
Hidden beneath the old city hall. Banks of computers, seismic monitoring equipment decades ahead of anything I'd seen. Someone had been orchestrating everything from there.
Pause. You mean the earthquake itself?
The earthquake, the reconstruction, all of it. 15 years of careful manipulation. But Tony, when I accessed those computers, I triggered something, an alert system.
Someone knows you're there.
They've always known. I think they've been waiting for me specifically. There were files, Tony. Files with my name, my research, detailed reports about my family.
That must have been terrifying to discover.
Terrifying, yes, but also clarifying. All these years I blamed myself for not being there when the earthquake hit, for being away at that conference while my parents died.
And now?
Now I understand it wasn't random. Someone orchestrated their deaths, Maya. Someone who needed me to leave town, to stay away until the right moment.
What kind of person could do such a thing?
That's what I'm about to find out. The system showed an active presence in the facility. Someone's been living down there, maintaining the equipment, watching everything.
Are you planning to confront them?
I have to. There's a timer counting down on the main console. Whatever they're planning, it reaches completion in 6 hours.
Maya, that sounds incredibly dangerous.
Everything about this has been dangerous. But I'm done running from the truth. I've spent 15 years carrying guilt that wasn't mine to carry.
What do you think will happen when you face them?
Long pause. I think I'll finally understand why my hometown had to die, why my family had to die, and maybe, if I'm very lucky, I'll be able to stop it from happening again.
Again?
The seismic data suggests this isn't the first town they've experimented on. There are patterns, Tony, earthquake signatures that match events going back decades.
You're talking about confronting someone who's been orchestrating disasters for years.
I'm talking about confronting someone who made me an orphan to serve their purpose. Fear doesn't begin to cover what I should feel right now.
But you're going anyway.
I'm going anyway.
Maya, you mentioned finding that control room beneath the ruins. What was going through your mind as you prepared to confront whoever had orchestrated all of this?
Long pause. You know, Tony, after 15 years of carrying that guilt, that weight of survivor's remorse, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before the earthquake. Clarity. Pure, crystalline clarity about what needed to be done.
That must have been both terrifying and liberating.
It was. I remember standing there, looking at all those monitors showing the reconstruction progress, the seismic manipulation data, and I realized I wasn't the same frightened graduate student who'd fled this town. I was Dr. Maya Chen, someone who understood the science they were using against us.
How did you prepare yourself for what was coming?
I took inventory. Not just of the evidence I'd gathered, but of everything I'd learned about myself during those years away. The conferences where I'd defended my research, the moments I'd stood up to colleagues who dismissed my theories. Each experience had been preparing me for this.
What about the emotional preparation? This wasn't just about science anymore.
Pause. I thought about my family, my parents, my little brother. For so long, I'd avoided those memories because they hurt too much. But standing in that underground facility, I let myself remember their faces clearly. Not the last moments, but the joy. The way my mother hummed while cooking, how my father would explain geological formations during our hikes.
You were drawing strength from them.
Exactly. And I realized something profound, Tony. They wouldn't want me to carry guilt. They'd want me to use everything they'd taught me, everything I'd become, to stop this from happening to other families.
So you were fighting for more than just truth or justice.
I was fighting for the future. For every family that deserved to feel safe in their homes. Every child who should grow up without artificial disasters reshaping their world. The technology down there, it could trigger earthquakes anywhere, anytime.
That's an enormous responsibility to shoulder.
It was, but as I checked my equipment one final time, made sure my phone was recording, I felt ready. Scared, yes, but ready. Sometimes, Maya, the most important moments in our lives require us to be braver than we ever imagined possible.
And you were about to discover just how deep this conspiracy really went.
Quietly, deeper than I ever could have imagined.
Maya, you're standing at the epicenter now, the machine that's been orchestrating all of this. What's going through your mind?
Long pause. 15 years, Tony. 15 years I've been running from this place, and it's been calling me back the entire time. Not the town, this machine. It knew I'd figure it out eventually.
The seismic readings you're showing me, they're not natural earthquake patterns at all, are they?
No. They're artificial. Precisely calculated. Someone used this device to trigger the earthquake that killed my family, that destroyed everything I loved. And then they waited.
Waited for what, Maya?
For me to come home. Voice breaking the rebuilding. The stones moving back into place. It wasn't random. It was bait. They needed me to see it, to investigate it, to lead them to something they couldn't find on their own.
What could they possibly need from you after all this time?
My father's research. He discovered this machine years before the earthquake. He was trying to warn people, but no one believed him. A device this advanced, buried beneath our little town for who knows how long.
And you think that's why the earthquake happened? To silence him?
I know it is. Footsteps on metal, the control panel here, Tony. It's still active. Someone's been maintaining it, using it. The earthquake wasn't the end of their plan. It was the beginning.
Maya, you're telling me someone murdered an entire town to cover up the existence of this machine?
Not just to cover it up, to clear the area, to give them time to study it without interference. But they needed my father's notes to fully understand how it works, and those notes were buried with our house.
Until the house rebuilt itself.
Exactly. They've been using small pulses, tiny tremors, to guide the reconstruction, stone by stone, bringing back just enough of the town to uncover what they needed.
But Maya, if they have the machine, and they have your father's research now, what do they need you for?
Silence, then whispered. Because the machine isn't just a weapon, Tony. It's a key. And I'm the only one left who knows what it opens.
What does it open, Maya?
Sound of machinery humming. I think we're about to find out. Someone's coming.
Maya, you're standing at the center of it all now. What choice are you making?
Long pause. I'm letting it go, Tony. All of it.
The technology that could rebuild entire cities?
The technology that destroyed my family first. That's what I finally understood. It had to break everything to learn how to fix it.
And the person who's been waiting for you all these years?
They thought I'd want revenge. Power. But standing there, watching those stones move themselves back into place, I realized they were just as trapped as I was.
Trapped by what?
By the belief that we can undo our mistakes if we just have enough control. But some things aren't meant to be rebuilt exactly as they were.
So you walked away from it all?
I chose to remember instead of resurrect. My family lived, Tony. They loved. That doesn't need to be reconstructed. It just needs to be honored.
And now?
Now, I help others learn what earthquakes really teach us. How to bend without breaking.
So, Maya, 15 years later, You've seen your town rebuild itself stone by stone. What does that mean for you now?
It means some mysteries choose their own timeline, Tony. The quantum field didn't just restore buildings. It gave me back the chance to say goodbye properly.
And the people who orchestrated all this?
Gone. But their technology remains dormant. Sometimes I think they underestimated what they'd unleash. The Earth has its own memory, deeper than any human scheme.
Do you still practice seismology?
Soft laugh, how could I not? But I study tremors differently now. Every fault line might hold secrets we're not ready for.
What would you tell someone facing their own impossible return?
That going back isn't about erasing the past, Tony. It's about understanding that some places hold more than geology can explain. Some losses transform into something we never expected to find.
And your family?
They're at peace. Finally, so am I. The town sleeps again, exactly as it should be.
So, Maya, as we wrap up your remarkable story, what does it mean to you now that Millbrook exists in both timelines?
It's strange, Tony. I spent 15 years running from ghosts, only to discover they were never really gone. The town chose to preserve what mattered most.
And your family?
I can visit them now. Not as memories, but as they were. Sarah still leaves her books scattered everywhere. Mom still hums while cooking. Pause, it doesn't erase the loss, but it offers something I never expected.
Forgiveness?
Peace. Maybe. The earthquake wasn't my fault, even though I carried that weight for so long. The technology, the experiment gone wrong, none of it was about me.
What will you do now?
Stay. Help protect what we've rebuilt. The town trusted me to come back, to understand. I won't abandon it again.
Any regrets about returning?
Only that it took me 15 years. Some journeys home are worth the wait, even when they lead somewhere impossible.